I consider this a great honor to be able to stand in this morning with the other men who have risen to stand in this pulpit until we find a full-time minister. And if I do well this morning, you can give Connie the benefit because she helps me. She has advice. And most of all, she says that she always says a prayer for me. This morning, talk about obedience. Obedience is important. Obedience has to be learned. We don't come by it naturally. Children learn, first of all, from their parents. And then they learn obedience from the teachers and the staff at school and colleges. If they go off into the military, they learn obedience from their officers. If they go in and get a job, they have to learn obedience to supervisors and the rules of the place they work. And all of us have to learn obedience to the civil authorities, because they are empowered by God Himself to keep the peace and protect all of us. But most of all, we have to learn obedience to God Himself. And that's the most important obedience of all. But there is a problem with obedience, learning it. It is not always easy. And obedience sometimes is hard. But it's important. Obedience to parents is important. One of the first things a child learns, don't touch that hot stove because it will hurt. Don't stick your whatever into the electric socket. You can be hurt bad. And in school, before you cross the street, look both ways. Make sure nothing is coming. You're driving your car and you come to a road crossing. Stop, look, and listen. And if you go to Grand Canyon National Park and you stand before that awesome view on that fence line, there's a sign, do not go beyond this fence. Because some of those that have done that are listed in the record books of those who died by falling 2,000 feet off those cliffs. Jesus had to learn obedience. What? Jesus was God. He's with God in the beginning, and He was God. And He made all things that are made. He made the rules, commandments of God that we're to live by. He had to learn obedience? Does that make sense? In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8 and 9, it was read this morning. Son, though He was the Son of God, He learned obedience from what He suffered And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Like I said, obedience is not always easy. It can be hard. In fact, not a one of us, well, perhaps the very little ones, have ever or ever will obey perfectly all the commands of our parents, of the school, of the military, of our bosses, or of the civil government. There are so many rules, there are so many things for us to be aware of and to do that we will never be able to do all of them perfectly. Why is this? Because during a waking day, we have to make dozens, hundreds, maybe even, depending on where we are, thousands of decisions. And it's hard to make all of those decisions the correct ones. At times I have been driving down the road, talking or watching on something else, knowing there's a stop sign there, and then realizing this after I'd gone through, I just read a stop sign. That's just one example. Some of us, older ones, that know what a VCR is, remember how hard it was to program a VCR. You have to be a rocket scientist. And when we get a job and we're being trained on that job, there's lots of things to learn, and the first day we don't do even half of them. The second day we do more, and after we've been there for a while and learned them all, then we're pretty good at doing everything that we're supposed to do. But it takes time. In the military, you get drafted or you sign up, you go through basic training. You learn from your mistakes. Boy, do you learn from your mistakes, right? And with the same thing with the wills of God, the laws of God. It's hard to remember the right thing to do always in every situation. There are distractions. Sometimes we have a terrible headache and we're sick and our mind is just not awake. It's just not in operating order. Or we get in situations that are very, very tense and we have emotions. We sometimes with fear we forget. Sometimes we get so angry we forget. But the point is that we cannot always in every situation obey perfectly. That's the problem. That is the bad news. That no matter how hard we try, in a year's time, we have to make millions of decisions. In an entire lifetime, we've had to make billions of decisions. And it's not possible to make them, all of them, the correct ones and do the right thing all the time. That's being human. If it's a guy named Murphy, if it's possible to do something wrong, sooner or later we'll do it wrong. But when we do not obey God's law, there are severe consequences, even if we do it accidentally. Because the first rule, the first rule he gave man was multiply, fill the earth, be fruitful. The second was to keep the garden tended. The third was to rule over the animals and over the earth. And the fourth one's don't eat anything off that tree in the center of the garden. If you do, you will surely die. That's a very severe consequence. And that law is in effect today. That if we break God's law, we will die. And every one of us, except these very tiny ones that don't know any better yet, have broken God's laws, have disobeyed His will. And prior to about 30 AD, when something special happened, they all had the sentence of death hanging over their heads. But man cannot give perfect obedience. He's incapable of giving perfect obedience. There's only one man that ever gave perfect obedience. And that was Jesus. The only one. He was made perfect. Let's read just some scriptures here. Luke 2:51. Then he went down to Nazareth with them, his parents, and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. John 6:38. For I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me. Matthew 26:39 and 42. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And later on, he went away a second time and prayed, My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. And he said in John 15:10 to his disciples, If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in love. Why did he want that cup to be taken away? What was the cup? The cup was suffering and death, not just suffering and death on the cross, but as it says, he became sin on the cross for us. He took the curse of sin on himself. He did two things for us. We are enabled to give perfect obedience. So he substituted his perfect obedience for us. And he died for us. He took the curse, the death for sin, on himself for us. He substituted himself on the cross for us. We do not have to give perfect obedience because he gave perfect obedience for us, and he shares his perfect obedience with us. And we do not have to die a spiritual death because he died it for us. Philippians 2:8. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. He offered himself, and he made himself perfect in obedience for us. We cannot, no human except himself ever could be righteous by obeying. He obeyed perfectly, so he was righteous enough, perfect righteousness, to be the perfect sacrifice to substitute for us. And when we obey the gospel, when we believe and we repent, we confess Him as Lord, and join Him in His death, burial, and resurrection by being buried in water and raised up, He gives us His righteousness. Amen. And that is the invitation as we stand and sing.